So you've introduced yourselves. I'll introduce myself briefly for those of you that I haven't gotten to meet yet. My name's Suzanne Kirkendall. I'm the founder and CEO of Verelon. I have spent over a decade in behavioral science, starting in academia, moving to marketing, to consulting, and now trying to help bridge the worlds between folks with behavioral science expertise and businesses who could benefit. I started this journey in Australia. My family moved to Sydney when I was 13. I did high school and undergrad there. I started doing my college studies in medical science, thinking I wanted to help people and I was good at school. So that's what you do, you become a doctor. Luckily, I took some psychology electives and realized I liked that way more, changed my major halfway through, and have been on this path ever since. I was so excited about what behavioral science can do in the real world that I set my sights on graduate school back in the US, moved to New York City, having never been here, never even been to the Northeast before. Took the leap of faith because I could see what this can do. I could see how it can make the world a better place. Even if there wasn't a roadmap for it yet, I've been following the breadcrumbs along the way. That's led me to co-founding the social science division of a global marketing agency, scaling and leading the North America office of a global behavioral science consultancy. In the course of all of that, ultimately selling millions of dollars worth of projects to the world's largest companies, from consumer goods to luxury to retail to banking, you name it. I've worked with them, helped them solve all kinds of different problems of human behavior change. And I've gotten to publish research. I'm a certified executive coach, and I get to lecture at universities and speak about this at industry conferences very frequently, which I love to do. I love spreading the word of behavioral science to folks. And I share all of this because I want you to know that I have been in your shoes. I've been in the place where you are so excited, you have all this expertise, you've done the training, you've done the reading. You can see how this is such a better way to do things than what people are doing now. And you're trying to convey it to them, and it is totally falling flat, and it is deeply frustrating. And so I felt that frustration. I have figured out over the past decade how to work around it in ways that are more effective for myself and the people I'm trying to help. And so that's what I want to share with you today. I want to give you some of the frameworks and some of the ways of thinking that I have had to figure out on my own along the way to save you a few years of pain and frustration so you can get to impact sooner. So you might have joined today because you can relate to some of these situations. You might be someone who's the unheard expert, where you have the degree, you have done the research, and you are not getting the traction that you want. You might be the uncredited insider. You're in a company, you're in a role where you sort of get to do this, but it's not quite at the level or the type of recognition that you want. Or you might be the emerging talent. You're a bit earlier in your career and you're trying to get your foot in the door. Some of the things I know about folks who are unheard experts are you have the credentials, you have the degree or probably multiple degrees. You've read and probably actually conducted the research. You can explain all the most complicated behavioral science techniques in your sleep and apply them in novel and interesting and robust ways to solve problems like nobody else. But when you try to bring this expertise to business conversations, you're seeing everyone's eyes glaze over and you don't understand why. And it's so, so frustrating and you're feeling stuck. If you're more of an uncredited insider, you might already get to do behavioral science in your job. You just might not be allowed to call it that. You might have to call it design or research or strategy. And you can see how this toolkit applies to what your organization is working on. You can see so many missed opportunities if they had just used it more or more intentionally or at a different scale, and how much more effective your initiatives could be. But you can't get your leaders to take it seriously, to give you the bandwidth or the resources to really run with it, or even acknowledge that this is a discipline with a name that has a lot of its own value. Or you might be in more a position of being emerging talent, where you're earlier in your career journey. You really want to build your journey around behavioral science, but you can't get your foot in the door. You can't find those job postings that match what you know you want to do and what you can do. This is not something you can Google, right? There's not a standard job title here available for you to find online. And so you're feeling stuck and you try to explain the value to the people who will give you a chance, but at best you're getting that's interesting, that's a really fun fact, but you're not getting the progress that you want. So I'm curious, for those of you who are here, these are the things that I typically hear from folks who have these challenges. I'm curious, which one resonates with you most, or it might be multiple. Can you type one, two, three, or some combination thereof in the chat so I can understand a little bit more about you? All three, lots of ones and threes. Ah, we do have an uncredited insider. That's great. We're not all on the outside, but many of us. For sure. So this is something that resonates. So first benefit is you're not alone, because that can be a hard part about being in this space is it's hard to find other people like you. So that's part of what I'm trying to build here as well, is that community for us. So today, and the rest of our time together, we're going to dive more into why behavioral science people like us get told no over and over, what we're actually doing wrong. I'll then, of course, give you some suggestions and a really concrete framework for you to use going forward to help you fix that so your expertise can land more impactfully. And we'll talk a little bit about how to use it, the context to find opportunities to apply this learning. So the big thing I want to emphasize, because this is a mind shift for most of us, is that the problem is not your expertise. You have read enough papers and books. You have conducted enough research. You have talked to another behavioral scientist enough times. You know enough. You do not need to know more or come across as more robust. The problem is your translation. When I lecture at Columbia Business School and students in their master's and exec MBAs, programs ask me, what's the most important skill for a career in behavioral science? I tell them it's translation. It doesn't matter how much you know if you can't get it across to other people. And so that's what we're going to be focused on today. Because what I see over and over and over, and what I've done over and over until I learned otherwise, is the way that we tend to pitch what we do to people is something like this, where we say, I use behavioral science or combi or nudge or whatever your favorite theory is to help organizations change behavior. I'm telling them what we do. It's not wrong, but it's not compelling enough. I did my dissertation on decision architecture or another topic. I think it could be really applicable to what your team is working on. Also, not wrong, but still a little bit self-focused. Getting closer is something like behavioral science is a really powerful tool that a lot of leading companies are starting to use, but it's still not landing, right? We've all tried these and we're still not getting where we want to go. Do any of these sound like things that you've said? I have definitely said all of these things many times. All of them, one for sure. I'm in this picture and I don't like it. I know, I'm sorry. There's going to be some tough love today, but again, I've been there. I still do it sometimes, so don't worry. Yep, one word for word. We do this. Continuing the tough love theme, when we do this, what business leaders that we're trying to convince are actually thinking is something like, so what? Why does this matter to me? Or even, what do I do with this? Because what's happening is when you're a person in a business environment, you are thinking in outcomes, you're thinking in metrics, you're thinking in the problems that you need to solve. You are not thinking first in concepts and processes, and definitely not theories. And so there's a disconnect here, right? And neither group is wrong. Neither group is smarter. Neither group is better. It is simply different. But at the end of the day, if you are someone who speaks English and you want to work with someone who speaks French, it is your responsibility to learn French. It is not their responsibility to learn English, right? And so this is what we're coming from, is we need to learn the translation skills to speak the language that your audience is speaking, so you get to collaborate the way that you want to collaborate with. Because right now, yes, people might find you interesting if they get past the what do I do with this? They might say, wow, that's really interesting. It's a really fun fact. but they're not seeing your value, right? They're not giving you the projects that you want, the jobs that you want, the opportunities that you know that you can make a real difference. Because what's possible when we start to use these translation skills is you will be able to convey that value to the point where people will seek you out. They will say, I have a really tricky problem. I'm going to call this person because I know they have a unique way of doing it that's better than other people. They're great to work with and they're really impactful at the end of the day. And so I would be lucky to have their help. So that's what we're aiming for here. So, how do we do that? This is something I call the FLIP framework. It is deceptively simple, but it's really important to nail and use in a methodical way every time. So we're going to go through it in detail. But it's 3 steps. The first is read. We want to read the person, read the room, read the context. We'll talk more about how we do that. The most important thing is the flip. That's why it's the flip framework. We're going to reverse how we present our value to people. We traditionally have done what we saw in that previous slide where we say, I use this methodology, and maybe we get to the benefit to our listener. We're flipping that. We're going to break that habit. And then something we definitely don't normally think of is what do you do after that conversation? Where does things go after you're done with your pitch? You need to arm your target audience with the thing that's going to help them persuade the other folks whose buy-in they need before you can get that job, that project, that initiative to go forward. These 3 words are the only 3 words I want you to take away from today. If you take away nothing else, this is the most important thing. Read, flip, arm. This is going to change how your expertise lands, no matter who you're talking to going forward, if you use it in a methodical way. So let's go deeper. First step is read. This is before you speak to anyone, know their world. Don't think about how you would solve it. Don't think about the methodologies that you want to apply here. Think about them. As an individual, what are their goals, their challenges, their likes and dislikes, their professional background? Know them as much as you can. But remember, people do not work in isolation. They work in their broader contexts. So think bigger. Their team. What team are they on? What is their position on that team? What is that team's responsibility officially and unofficially? How does that team work within the organization that they're part of? Think about their company. What is the company's goals, challenges, concerns, competitors? What are they trying to achieve publicly? How do they actually work internally? And the industry, what is everyone worried about? What are the trends? What are the things that will help them know that you understand the sea that they're swimming in? Because at the end of the day, every conversation you come to with anyone in any context, their brains are thinking, what's in it for me? It's not bad, it's not selfish, it's not wrong. It's just how our brains always work. And so when we come to a conversation trying to persuade someone that our behavioral science expertise has value, you need to be able to answer for them immediately, right away, clearly, what's in it for them before you do anything else. Because if you can't nail that, nothing else matters. There's a lot more that goes into this besides just thinking on those levels. I provide this to the folks that I work with in my coaching program, where we go through all kinds of AI prompts that you can use to help you do that reading in great detail. Everything from social network mapping to understand how power and influence moves in the environment that you're trying to be effective in, to really classic techniques like using the marketing benefits ladder. I share this just so you know that there's a lot to this. We can't get to it all today, but these are the sorts of things that I think about when I'm trying to help folks be more persuasive and get their expertise the impact that they deserve. This is all really important to do because nobody actually wants behavioral science. They want their problems solved. And this is a hard one because sometimes you'll be in a situation, a very exciting situation, where someone says they do want behavioral science. And then you unleash, you're like a fire hydrant. You say, finally, someone wants this. Let me share with them all of my really great ideas. Unfortunately, as behavioral scientists, we should know better. That just because someone says something does not mean that's what's actually motivating them, right? And so we need to practice what we preach a little bit and understand, yes, maybe they say they want behavioral science, but subconsciously, what they really want is their problem to be solved. I've learned this the very hard way over and over and over by hitting my head against the wall a lot of times before I figured out a better way. This is an example of the type of slide that I used to share when I was at the marketing agency. I had been brought in to start this social science division. They wanted it. The global chief strategy officer was championing this. We were putting it in every new business pitch, trying to get it across all of the different client accounts that we had at the agencies. And so folks would come to me, we'd be getting ready for the new business pitch. I would say, oh my gosh, I have so many great ideas. Here's this framework on top of this framework integrated with the social ecological model, and the whole journey is mapped out for all five stakeholders. And I have solved diabetes for you in one slide. You're welcome. And for some reason, folks' eyes just glazed over, right? Shocking, I know. But it took me a long time to realize, like, yes, they want this, but they don't want this. They want the outcome of this. And so learning, how do I flip it, right? And give them what they want, not the way that I'm going to give them that outcome. Because if you think about it, when you ask for someone for help, that's how you feel. When you go to the doctor, you go because you want to feel better. You don't go because you want them to explain germ theory and demonstrate all the latest surgical techniques to you and expound upon the latest debate in the field about this or that methodology being better. You just want to feel better. It's the same thing for the folks that we are trying to help. And so flipping your mindset to saying, I want to be of service. I know that the way to do that is not to overwhelm them, but in fact to just figure out what their problem is and connect the dots for them. That's where you're going to start to see better outcomes. And so that is what brings us to the second step, which is flip. As I alluded to, we do not want to lead with the process, which we saw in the earlier slides is something that we've all done. It's understandable, but it's something that we're going to change starting today. Instead, we are going to flip our habit. We're going to flip our instinctual approach to be leading with their outcome, not our process. It is really important for us to connect the dots for them to what's in it for me. This is not about you laying it out on the table and it's so obvious to you how this could be helpful. How could anyone not see this? It is not obvious to people who do not have this lens. That's why we are there. We want to give them this lens. We want to help them in that way. But you need to actually help them by actually connecting the dots really clearly and explicitly. Your goal is to give it to them in a sentence, to simplify it so much that they can remember that sentence and say it to their boss a week later when you are not in the room. That is success here. It's that level of simplicity. It is a lot simpler than you think it needs to be, whether that's a visual slide that you've created or whether that's the concept you're sharing with them needs to be significantly simpler than your instinct is because you're so used to this. So that is something that I emphasize a lot as well. So flip, lead with their outcome, connect the dots for what's in it for them, and simplify way more than you think you need to. Here's a real life example that caught my eye. Walking down the street in Manhattan, this lovely person, Alex, is offering some moving services, and they did a really good job of demonstrating this framework. They have the benefit leading the poster, bright red, really big font. Do you need something heavy moved today? That's what's in it for me. That is the language that I, as a potential customer, am thinking in when I am thinking about my problem and looking for help. I think, I have something heavy I need moved today. And voila, there's Alex ready to connect the dots for me. Alex then goes into a little bit more detail. But again, the detail is about what he's helping with, not how explicitly, right? Trash, furniture, boxes, small moves, heavy lifts, same day help, using the language that I'm going to use to talk about my own problem. And then there's a clear call to action, simple, right? For our learning purposes, I've done a little bit of a recreation to show you the difference between done well versus what we tend to do in behavioral science. We tend to approach trying to get these types of customers by saying, I am strong and I have a truck. And maybe we elaborate and say, I can move trash, furniture, and boxes. And then we expect that to be enough, right? We haven't connected the dots. We haven't used the language for how they talk about their problems. And we're talking about us and our methodology. We're not talking about them and their outcome. So it's a silly example, but I use it so that it's really clear what we're trying to get to here. So let's apply it to some real life examples. So this is work that I've definitely done in the healthcare space where we're trying to help with pharma sales reps effectiveness, right? So we use behavioral science to help pharma sales teams by applying frameworks like COM-B and motivational interviewing to understand HCP decision-making patterns. We're learning this framework. What could be improved here? What do we notice we're doing that we shouldn't be doing if we're using the FLIP framework? Yeah, great point. Abbreviations. We're using language that's not theirs. What is COM-B? What is HCP? Probably what is motivational interviewing? We don't want to use jargony language and put people off. And yes, we're leading with the process. Exactly. I use this to do this. Exactly. So it'd be better if the outcomes appear earlier. So what we've done instead in the after example is your reps, so we're not using I, we're using you, are leaving conversations without moving the needle. Your brand is starting to fall behind your competitors. So I'm showing you I have done the read step. I know you, I know your company, I know your industry, I know the big problems that you have. I help your reps understand what's actually driving physician behavior so they can have conversion rate conversations that change prescription rates, not just inform and educate. So then I tell you what I can do for you, but I'm not telling you the methodology or the theory that I'm using. I'm telling you the outcome that I will get for you in language that you use. Exactly. What's in it for me? More sales, usually. Usually that will help. Here's another example for a more internal initiative for folks who are of that area. You say, I'm proposing a behavioral science informed intervention using implementation intentions and social norms to address the low adoption rate of our new performance management system. What could be improved here? What are we doing wrong? We want to lead with the outcome and so much jargon. Oh my goodness. Theory. It used to be when I was at marketing agency, as soon as I said the word theory, even if I didn't get into it, people's eyes would glaze over. Like you really got to simplify more than you think. Exactly. So after, what we would do is say, okay, only 30% of managers are using the new performance system. It's starting to show in our retention numbers. So what's happening? Why does this matter? I know how to find out why they're not using it, and I know how to fix it without another training they're going to ignore. So it kind of anticipating an objection as well. So these are the sorts of things we want to be thinking about when we think about lipping. From there, something that we all forget is that the person in front of you is not the only person that you need to convince. That person, whether it's a job interview, whether it's an internal initiative you're trying to get your boss to approve, whether it's a client you're trying to sell work to, that person needs to be able to go to other people and sell you without you being there. They need to get their team on board, their boss, maybe their boss's boss, their budget committee, the procurement team. You don't know, right? Hopefully you know a little bit because you did the read step, but this is much beyond you and the person that you're speaking with directly. You will never be in the room when the actual approval decision is made. So rather than stopping at, oh, this person is now bought in, they're an advocate, I've succeeded, that's only part of the way down the path to actually getting you where you want to go. So your job is to anticipate, and this is part of your homework that you do before you have the conversation. What might their boss or other stakeholders ask? Because at the end of the day, the person who gets to do the work that you want to do is not the person with the fanciest degree or the highest number of publications, or any other credibility signal. It's the person whose idea travels the furthest. It's the person who can get other people to advocate for it, not just you and maybe one other person. What you're asking people to do is actually a lot, right? If you were in their shoes and they were a really big expert in something that you probably had almost no background in, and then they said, "Here, go sell this for me without me," that's scary. That's hard. I wouldn't know how to do that for any other field. And so us expecting other people to do that is not reasonable, right? And it's not going to get us what we want. So we need to make sure that we're giving people what they need to have an effective conversation when you're not in the room. To give you an example, I'm going to share a slide that I've presented many, many times that has gotten me clients calling me from the airport before they've even gotten home from the conference to set up a call with their team. It's gotten me conference speaking invites years after people saw it. I was just speaking at a conference last month where I was invited to teach a masterclass. And as part of the introduction for me teaching that masterclass, the organizer talked about this slide and seeing it years ago and still remembering it. I would love to hear what you guys think it is. You don't have to say it out loud, but just imagine, like, what is that slide? It's not what you think. This is the slide where I'm teaching people about Behavioral Science 101. What is nudging? And I say, can you spot the nudge in this picture? And the whole room, their eyes get really big, and then they laugh, and then it clicks, and you can see the eyeball moment, the light bulb moment, and they all say, the fly. And usually the men and the mothers get this one first, and then everyone else catches up pretty quickly. But we've just done something that really breaks through and connects with them on a human level and teaches them something in such a fun way. So when I present this slide, I talk about the story of the airport, right? A lot of us probably know it. That was having a lot of challenges with cleanliness in the men's restroom. And they had tried the traditional approaches to behavior change. They tried putting signs up and making rules, and none of that was working. Obviously, this is a problem because it was a customer experience issue, but it's also a cost issue. They were spending more in cleaning costs than they needed to. So this is something they really wanted to fix. They got desperate enough that they brought in a behavioral scientist. This behavioral scientist did some very deep, thorough work to understand the psyche of their target audience and the challenges and the drivers of the desired behavior change. And all of that culminated in them etching a fly in the urinal as a primitive form of gamification. And it caused cleaning costs to absolutely plummet and stayed that way from there on. So if you imagine the ROI of this one behavioral scientist's intervention design, huge, right? And so this is a story. This is relatable. It's unexpected. It's humorous. It clicks right away. And you can sum it up in a couple of words, right? The fly in the toilet slide. And so people remember this and it helps them get it. So this, when I was saying earlier, simplify, this is what I'm talking about. Simpler than you think. That's what's actually going to stick. You don't need them to get everything. You need them to get enough to get to the next conversation. At the end of the day, your goal is not to flex your intelligence on people, right? We know you have credibility. We know you're an expert. Your goal, if you want to get where you want to go, is to make other people feel smarter, not smaller, right? If you come at them with slides like I used to design, like I showed you that hot mess of stacked theory diagrams, you're just going to make them feel confused. People don't like to feel confused. People don't like to feel dumb, like they don't get it. And so your job is to not cause that feeling in other people when you're trying to share your expertise. And so finding, again, the ways to translate the analogies, the imagery, the stories, that's how you're going to get your expertise across in a way that's persuasive to other people. It's counterintuitive to those of us who have this academic training because academia teaches you the opposite. It's all about How can I show off as much as I can? How can I poke holes in other people's ideas to really have these debates? How can I be as robust and elaborate and complex as possible? And that's what's valued. This is the total opposite. So it is a lot of unlearning. I totally get it. I've gone through that journey myself, and I'm trying to, again, give you some shortcuts here so you don't have to deal with all of that yourself. So that is the key framework that I want you to walk away with today. Read the room, read the person, read the context, understand before you ever speak with them what is driving them, what their challenges are, how you might be able to help. Flip when you're in that conversation, reverse your instinct, lead with their outcome, the what's in it for them, followed maybe by your process, but don't open with it. And then arm them. Understand that after your conversation with them, they need to go convince other people for this to actually happen. And so give them the ammo, give them the resources, give them the understanding to be able to do that effectively without you in the room. So I'm curious, of these three steps, which has resonated the most? Which one do you want to use first as your next move after this webinar? Arm, flip, flip. Flip is crucial for sure. Yeah, flip is where our habits really kick in because that's also where we feel like we're trying to prove ourselves. And when we want to prove ourselves and convince them, we think, I need to go methodology. That's my credibility. So this is something where it takes practice, but just remember, flip. So for those of you who attended live, I want to say thank you with a little bit of a gift. I'm going to drop in the chat a PDF with a framework worksheet for you to be able to use this no matter your context, no matter who you're talking to, whether it's a job interview, uh, internal conversation, trying to get a client. This will help you apply this to your own situation. Work through a method, work through it systematically, and you will get better results than what you're currently getting, I promise. So that PDF is in the chat for those of you who are here live. Thank you very much for attending and making the time today. And that's a simple one-page framework with the 3 steps for you to work through. So when should you be using this? The short answer is all the time. To help you be a little bit more specific, anywhere you're looking for a yes to behavioral science, which could be as simple as you're going to a networking event or conference and you're trying to figure out, again, how do you explain to people what you do? I know I've talked to many folks in the behavioral science field who really struggle with this. It's part of why when I go to conferences, I tend to try to get a speaking slot and not just attend, so I can just explain to everyone for 30 minutes before I try to network with them. But if we don't have that opportunity, use this framework to help you with the flip, to understand your audience, to convey what you do and your value and why they should talk to you more in a short intro. Of course, if you're interviewing for roles, and this is important to think about. Yes, there are behavioral science roles out there, behavioral science consulting companies, etc. They're few and far between. And so thinking more broadly about where do I get to use these skills where the behavioral science isn't necessarily in the job title? Could be marketing, could be design, could be research. There are lots of spaces for us. They just might not know to ask for us by name. And so we need to get that across to them in a way that connects the dots between what they knew to ask for and what they don't even know they need, but you can see would make this even better for them. Similarly, if you're trying to pitch your way into a role that doesn't even exist yet, that's how I got some of my earliest behavioral science jobs. I was doing academic research in undergrad on text messaging interventions to help people take their medicine, using, of course, health psychology. We had some advisors from a private company who were health psychologists helping us out. I thought, oh my gosh, you can do this outside of academia. I need to know these people. So I said, hey, can I come shadow you at work for a day? They let me do that, which is very kind. At the end of that day, I said, can I come back next week? This was amazing. They let me. I did that for 6 months. And then I said, can you pay me? And they paid me. And so that was my college job for a year and a half. That was not something they were looking for, but that was an opening that I saw to follow what I saw as my passion, but also the way that I could provide value. And I pitched it to them. I pursued it and I provided them with a positive what's in it for me as well. So think about that. If there's a space where you think, gosh, I can really see this would be amazing, win-win for them and for me. They aren't asking for it because they don't know. So you're actually doing them a favor by telling them about what you can do here. Of course, if you're in a traditional kind of consulting or services business and you're trying to sell behavioral science to clients, this flip framework can be very useful for you. And it's also good if you're trying to get internal buy-in. If you're trying to get folks to let you do more behavioral science in your job where it's not necessarily part of your remit, but you can see how it would be much better for that next initiative. And you want them to give you a chance to try it and to pilot it and to grow from there. I really emphasize that your way into using behavioral science in your career is probably not going to come from a job posting or an RFP asking for it. It's going to come from conversations and it's going to come from you conveying your value in a way that lands with other people in language that makes sense to them and gets them excited, right? We want them to feel something too. So now this flip framework is hopefully something that will help you with that. Of course, today is just the start. We've only had time to scratch the surface, and that framework is one of many. And frankly, your career deserves more than a coffee chat, and that's why I created Verelon. And I'm really excited to offer for the first time the Translation Transformation Coaching Program. So I have taken all of my decade of learning things the hard way and applying things in the real world and coaching and teaching to create this program for you. So I want to be able to give you the confidence to walk into any room, make the case for behavioral science, no matter the audience, really clear view of the opportunities that are already around you in your network, in your skill set, and to make the most of them. This is something that can be really hard when it's not a linear path. It's not something that other people have done before. It can be hard to see it for yourself. And I make it really practical. Templates, AI prompts, hands-on feedback that you can use immediately and going forward so you can get to yes when you want to use your behavioral science skills. There are only 5 spots. Webinar attendees, as a thank you, you get 24 hours before everyone else to apply. The applications will be reviewed as they come in, so I do encourage you to submit them as soon as you can. There's a link coming in the chat for you. But this is something that I'm really excited to be able to offer and look forward to hearing from you and helping you grow and have the impact that you deserve. So at the end of the day, I moved from the other side of the world to pursue a super vague behavioral science passion because I believe that it does make the world a better place. It makes individuals better by equipping them with the skills to design the life that they want without fighting their brain along the way, makes organizations more effective in serving their communities, gives policymakers better tools to do things that actually work for society. And so I want more of us in those rooms. I don't want us all in the lab. I want us in real life so that we can make the impact that I know we can make. We are a really smart, empathetic, understanding, innovative group. And so I want us to all have the skills to make the change that the world needs so that you can go from being an unheard expert, an uncredited insider, someone earlier in your career, to being a really valued practitioner. This is why I created Verelon, and this is why I held today's webinar, and I hope that you guys got a lot out of it. So thank you so much. Love to open it up for any questions that we might have. Do I still work with academics to keep my intellectual passions alive? Yes, I do. Had the opportunity to publish a wonderful paper just earlier this year with my friend Anne Catherine et al. On a whole new framework for how to engage folks with digital health interventions. I volunteer on the alumni board for Columbia's School of Public Health, where I did my master's degree to stay involved with building that community. I have contracted with the Public Health Training Center at Columbia to create trainings for frontline public health staff for the past 5 years. This is something that I love having my feet in multiple worlds. That's what I do. I think there's so much value in having folks who are in non-traditional perspectives, bridging those gaps. So that's absolutely something that I love to do. What's it like code switching? Cognitive load. Yeah, I mean, it's different for everyone. It depends on your strengths, your interests, your specific context. I'm happy to talk more about it, but it is something where you learn to balance, right? You find the things that are complementary and the things that you are excited about. And then you find how they can feed each other with that energy and with the knowledge, right? All right, I'm reading more questions. Yep. UX, product development. UX showed promise 10 years ago, plateaued as a different discipline. Yeah, commonalities and differences. How do we learn from UX about pitching and integrating BSI? I love this question. Something that I say often when I'm talking to folks about the challenges of behavioral science and getting people to use it is there are no companies that I know of that have a line item in their budget for behavioral science projects, right? So you need to figure out how do we get into their budget? What are we even fitting in their business world? Are we under the marketing budget? Are we under the training budget? Are we the research budget? Where do we go? UX has done a really good job of making themselves a business function with a line item. And so, just from that perspective, behavioral science has a lot to learn. And I think there is some really good inspiration to be taken from there. And how do we translate and make ourselves relevant to those folks? Ah, I'm already doing that. What do you have to add? I know how to find out why they're not using it. I'm already looking into that. Yes, would love to hear what other folks think as well. It is really important for you to understand. This is why the read step is really important. What are they already trying? How is it working for them? Because if they're talking to you, there's an opportunity because if it was working that well, we wouldn't still have this problem, right? And so a lot of times your answer to these things will be more questions than just trying to give them the perfect answer. Understanding, okay, what have you tried? How is that working for you? What's not working about it for you? How much did it cost? Etc. Understanding where the gaps are so you can say, well, in fact, this is something that works for a tenth of the cost, half the speed, or half the time, more of the speed, etc. But that again is very context specific. So I'd be happy to have a conversation more about specific situations if that's helpful. All right. Jose, I see your hand is raised. Do you want to come off mute or just type in the chat? How do you deal with concepts that gain traction among the target audience, but in fact are misconceptions, missed shiny objects? I love this. Oh, Jose, go ahead. No, that's okay.
Okay, sorry about that. So no, appreciate the presentation. I have two questions. So one is, when you're trying to pitch to a client, like reading the room, how do you get that proper context from as an outsider? Because a lot of times, unless you're in the room, like unless you have physical access, it's hard to get that context. And then the second question is for advocacy and lawyers, it's us often an us versus them. And I love your point about making the other person feel smarter, not smaller. But in the advocacy context, that's often the strategy. So how can they adapt or code switch away from that? Because it feels like a zero sum game, even though it's absolutely not.
Yeah, great questions. So even if it might be the norm in some specific context to flex your smartness on other people, at the end of the day, you're dealing with people with human brains. We are behavioral scientists. We know the fundamentals of how they work. Even if, yes, the culture goes in this way, people prefer to feel good. People prefer to feel smart. So it's okay to swim upstream a little bit and engage with them on that level. Um, Jose, can you remind me of your first question? Sorry.
Sure. The reading the room when you're not in the physical proximity or you don't have an insider, like how do you get that context to make an informed pitch?
Absolutely. So there's a lot that goes into this depending on whether it's internal, external, how much time you have to prep. Could be as much as using AI prompts that I've developed to do all kinds of research on them, their industry, their competitors, their strategy, their publicly available financial records. Like you can go really deep here to get a lot of hints that help you create a pretty clear picture. On a much simpler level at the other end of the scale, you can ask people this directly. What's important to you? What are your biggest challenges? They'll tell you, they know to a certain degree, right? And so that's what you think about is using all of these different skills and tools that are available depending on the context and depending on how much time you have. But at the end of the day, it never hurts to just ask. So the misconceptions, myths, shiny objects. I have a confession to make. I love to burst a bubble here. Um, Myers-Briggs, oh my God. If anybody hasn't read Personality Brokers, I love telling people about that book. Unhinged, right? Totally based in absolutely nothing, but we use it everywhere, etc. Right? And so this is where you get into your mindset of, I'm here to be of service, right? I will rag on that with you guys because we're amongst friends. When we are trying to talk to someone who's super bought in, you meet them where they are, right? It's a universal advice for a reason. Meet them where they are, find out what they like about it, find out how it's been useful to them, and then build from there. Say, you know what might even be better? You know what actually the latest thinking is that you can use now. You still want to make them feel smarter, not smaller, right? So start where they are, understand why they like what that is, and then build from there. When it comes to myth busting, some of us might know this from our behavioral science training, but some of us might not. We do not tend to do myth busting correctly. People like to repeat the myth and then say, actually, the fact is, and that's that. But the science of fighting misinformation and disinformation says any repetition of something that's incorrect is going to reinforce it, even if you're repeating it to bust the myth. So you want to look into the science of how to do that. But essentially, what you want to do is something called a truth sandwich. So you want to lead with the fact. Personalities are not set by this, that, the other. They're actually really contextually based, and there are some key things, but blah, 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 whatever. Obviously, make it sound cooler than that. Then you say, some people actually mistakenly believe myth. And then you say, but really the truth is truth, right? Truth sandwich. So you're repeating the truth more than the myth, and you're only repeating the myth in the context of that's wrong, and you're minimizing it. So that's the two big important things. But don't start out just going full bore, trying to just tell people they're wrong. That's pretty much never going to go over well, and you're not going to make friends that way. So help them feel smarter. Sometimes B-sides being used in policy and processes on a surface level. How do you go further without getting the don't fix what isn't broken? I'd love to learn a little bit more about the specific challenge we're talking about here at some point if you want to chat. But essentially, baby steps. All of this is baby steps. A big problem that we have as a group is we tend to come at things with, again, that slide that I showed you where we've got everything solved on all layers for all stakeholders and the whole ecosystem, and it's really robust and overwhelming, and nobody's actually going to do it. So you start with what have they done already? What would be the next step to make this a level more robust, a level more impactful, and build there. Make sure you pick the next step to be something that's going to show an outcome that you can measure to make a case for yourself, to then create a virtuous cycle of people being bought in and excited and seeing the value. So then you can do the things that are a little bit more of a stretch goal or a little bit more that going to be perceived as a risk by them. So that's something that, again, it would be a little bit context specific, but those would be the principles I'd be looking at. Jose, you make a great point about people reject things they don't like or don't believe. We all know about confirmation bias. This is something that, again, that's why we start with getting on side. We understand what they're worried about. We understand what they like, what's been beneficial to them about that mistaken belief, and then build from there rather than going full frontal myth busting. Marketing benefits ladder. Yes, so this is something you can Google. It's a very classic concept, but it essentially explains to us that the way that we do talk about anything that we have to provide to other people needs to be at a much higher level than we think. So we tend to approach this by saying, let's say, I'm gonna sell you a pizza. The pizza has stuffed crust, and that's what I'm selling you. You're welcome, right? That's just talking about the product and the product features. Going up the ladder, you go all the way up from product features to the benefits of it. Like, I've saved you time cooking because I sold you a pizza, to what does this mean for you emotionally or even as an identity? You are a good mom because you feed your kids stuff that they like. You are a good dad because you spend more time with your family, whatever. So the marketing benefits ladder reminds us that if we stay at the bottom of the ladder, we're not going to be very persuasive. Tools, more geared towards enhancing consulting relationships or cold outreach, both. So I've used these across everything. I've done a lot of business development in my time. I've done a lot of working with existing network in my time for consulting, for jobs, for relationships, for community building. And so this is something where they can be used in lots of different ways depending on the context, hence the need for a little bit more of a high touch approach. Great question. Hi, Jose, I see your hand again.
Yeah, so thanks for sharing that really cool, groundbreaker slide. Do you have any tips or suggestions for those of us interested in speaking at conferences besides an RFP that some organizers put out? How do you identify those opportunities to pitch and speak?
One of my favorite ways to get into conferences is to go in last minute, meaning it's a week or two before the conference. Oh my goodness, they have an unfilled slot. They're stressing. You're there to save them. I've done this many times. And it's a real win-win, right? They don't want empty slots. You want to speak. So being prepared with something compelling, something that totally fits the agenda and their audience, showing you know what they're trying to convey in terms of the experience they're providing and creating for their attendees, and then being really, really easy to work with. All of those are really important. But that last minute timing trick has gotten me into a lot of places, or at least for much cheaper than going through the normal front door. A lot of doing behavioral science is creating your own line, not getting in the line that everyone else is in, because it's so hard to stand out in a crowded field. It's so much easier to convey this when you've created your own category for yourself. And so that's true with networking for conferences, for jobs, for projects, you name it. So that's something that I've worked on a lot as well and can help you with. All right, we're just about at time. So I want to wrap up promptly because I respect your busy schedules. But I want to say thank you again very, very much for joining me today. I'm so glad that you could be here for Verelon's first webinar. There will be many more to come. You'll be receiving email soon with the recording link and with a feedback survey if you'd be so kind to fill it out. We're always learning and improving. But I'm really grateful for you being here today, and I hope this is beneficial. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.